All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to get into our last section of material here for Unit 3. This is going to be on the demographic transition. And when we talk about the demographic transition, before we even start, I want you to pause the video here, come up with a couple things from this graph that we know for sure. Again, when we're attacking graphs, you want to look at the title, you want to look at the axes and what labels they have, and then what's happening to the data within them. That's going to allow you to make assumptions and also make predictions about what's happening in the graph. So go ahead, pause it for a second, see if you can pick out what's happening here. All right, so what we can see is anytime we're talking about demographics, we should know that it's going to be dealing with populations. Because demographers or demographers, they're the ones who are studying populations. So we have something dealing with a population here. And we can look at the transition, meaning it's going to be the population changing in some way. We can see that our y-axis is the births and deaths per thousand per year. So we're looking at rates within here. We're looking at rates of change, what's happening to the population with time. We have 3 different lines on here. That weight's showing us our birth rates, our death rates, and what's happening overall as a population. Then we have these 4 stages highlighted. So what we can assume is we're going to analyze what's happening to our total population as we move through these 4 stages of this model in terms of births and deaths. Anytime that we see differences in the two, we know there's going to be population change happening because we just talked about fertility rates and replacement rates. What the demographic transition model shows, it's about the process of industrialization. So as we industrialize as a country, we see predictable patterns happen within our growth. As they studied these countries that have undergone transitions from a pre-industrial society to a post-industrial society, they found that every single population has shown almost exactly the same trends. Whether it was in Europe, for the first part of the Industrial Revolution, whether it was in America as we industrialized and went through our Industrial Revolution, or whether it's in Japan, China, Kenya, Argentina, any country ends up showing the same predictable path. So what we look at are the 4 different stages of industrialization. In this first one, we have the pre-industrial state. Then we go from being pre-industrial and we start the industrialization process. So we're going to transition into our next stage. Then we finally get into our industrial state and finally into our post-industrial. So what you want to do when you're thinking through this is relate it back to America. Think about America as we did our Industrial Revolution. Pre-industrial era was going to be anything really before the 1800s because we didn't really start to industrialize in America until 1800s. So anything before the 1800s was that pre-industrial society. Really from 1800 until really probably I'd say 19 teens, we'll just say 1900 in generic terms for that transitional. Then when we get into the 1900s, that's where we started to see the industrialization really kick in. We turn into really a factory type of economy. So really from 1900 until really about the 1990s, we'll say. And then anything after 1990, we should be doing it. I always get confused here with the, I guess it would be this way. Greater than or less than, I need to know which way the alligator's eating. So when we look at this, we're looking at this type of mindset with it. So what we're going to look at is the birth rates and death rates. If you think about America in the early 1800s, we were having tons of babies per person. Before the 1800s, if you think about pioneer days, they were having 6 or 7 kids on average. And a lot of those kids were dying. If you've ever played Oregon Trail, you're going in the Conestoga wagon out west, and all of a sudden you see, oh, cholera happened. Your 3 kids have died. Or a raccoon came and bit you and carried away your kids. All kinds of crazy stuff was happening. So we had a really high birth rate, but we also had a really high death rate at the time. So because the birth rates and death rates were equal, we didn't see a population change happen. Even though they're really high, they're both high. So that's going to be resulting in a population that's fairly stable. When we started the transition, now we started to have improved healthcare. We started to realize that there were things happening to us that we could prevent. We transitioned out of that farmer agrarian lifestyle, and we started to have people starting to put businesses out there, and we started to have medicine being practiced, and we started to have other education was expanded, all those things. So when we see that happening, we see that our death rates began to fall down. This is going to be due to improved sanitation. And it's also going to have healthcare tied in. So our death rates end up falling off because now people are realizing what's making them sick. They know you shouldn't poop in your backyard where your well is at, because then you're going to be drinking contaminated water. We know that we need to go to the doctor when we're sick. It's not just some mythical thing that's happening to us. We're getting sick for a reason. We may have basic medicine that we can give to people. Think about, early days in America, we didn't have medicines really, but we knew how to start treating things holistically, with herbs and more homeopathic remedies. But the sanitation was the big one. We also had the ability to transport food. So now when food became scarce, we could give it to other people. We had the Transcontinental Railroad coming about, all those different things. We could transport healthy food long distances. People were able to eat vegetables and fruits during the winter time when normally they wouldn't be able to. So our quality of life drastically increased. So we see our death rates take a plunge, but people still haven't bought into it yet. They're still used to that agrarian type of lifestyle where they needed a ton of kids to help them out on the farm, to provide for them when they got old. And they knew that some of those kids were going to die off. So they needed the kids as part of the workforce, and they needed that elder care because they didn't have pensions. So we kept our birth rates really high. Birth rates were high, death rates were low. Anytime you have a gap, that's going to result in population growth. If our births are higher than our deaths, it's positive growth. If the births are lower than our deaths, then it's negative growth. So we see our population starting to climb in this time frame. So we have a growing population. The bigger the gap, the more quickly that growth is happening. Now, when we get into the industrial stage, this is where quality of life gets really good because now people aren't just working in factories. We start to have a spreading of the wealth. So people are starting to make tons of money. They're going to college. They're getting extensive medical training. They're dedicating their entire life to helping other people. We still have a lot of people working in factories, working in those high-risk jobs, so we still have deaths happening. But we have a lot more money and disposable income coming in. So now, people are getting paychecks. We're no longer farmers living to produce just the food for our family. We're going to a factory job every day. We're getting a paycheck. We're getting a pension. So because of that, we're able to dedicate more of our money to our health. So we start to see our death rates, they're still decreasing, and then they start to stabilize because we get to a point where we really can't prevent all causes of death. So we're still going to have deaths that occur. But if you look, it's a very low percentage of the population at this point. When we look at the birth rates, though, now we realize, hey, I don't need help on the farm anymore because I'm not a farmer anymore. I'm not going out and farming in the fields. I don't need help doing that. If I am a farmer, I'm going to be able to sell my food now and start mass producing it using tractors and other forms of equipment. So I don't need those kids anymore to help me on the farm. I also don't need those kids to take care of me in adult or in elderly times because now I have a pension system where I'm going to have money coming in when I retire. So what we see is those birth rates start to drop because there's not as much of a need anymore for children to be born. So because the birth rates are dropping and the death rates are already low, we still have a gap here, but we see the population starts to slow down. The growth starts to slow down towards the end because the birth and the deaths are almost equal. Now, once we get into the post-industrial, this is where we're at right now. We have more white-collar jobs than before. People aren't doing manual labor anymore. We've replaced a lot of the manual type of jobs with robots and machinery. So because of that, we have even higher amounts of wealth getting spread. Now, I know it's kind of sucky because we have the biggest gap that we've ever had with the gap between the wealthy and the poor, but we're getting to the point where we can start to end that. We can provide trainings for people and try to get them in the jobs that aren't as dangerous. So when we look at this, we end up having our births and deaths fairly low. What we see are the birth rates still fluctuate up and down because you have times where people are having more babies or less babies, things like that. But our medical care has gotten so good that our deaths are fairly predictable and constant. We know how many deaths to expect each year. Now, with births, there's a bunch of different things that can affect it. Right now, they're saying that in the next year, we're going to see a huge amount of surge in births because of the corona shutdown. We have a lot of people who are being trapped indoors. They're getting bored, so the husbands and wives start to have sex. They end up getting pregnant. They think there's going to be a higher pregnancy rate. So we would end up seeing that birth rate start to climb. Because of that, our population growth is fairly steady, but it does fluctuate up and down a bit. That's the post-industrial phase. Once we get into this fifth phase, now we're into the modern era, the industrial globalization era. This is where you see Japan at right now. What we're seeing in Japan is that birth rates are starting to fall considerably because now the entire population is working in that tech sector. So they're not having families anymore. They're moving away from thinking that families are important. They're only worried about themselves. Japan is having a huge problem with people not going out and socializing and not finding mates and reproducing. So their population is actually declining. So our birth rates start to go down. Our death rates kind of remain fairly constant and may even start to climb a bit because now our improved healthcare through these years has caused people to live longer. Now some of those people that have increased their life expectancy are starting to die off at a higher rate. So we're starting to see a difference in the birth and death, and what we see is the population starts to fall. This fifth stage is not going to be on the AP exam yet. College Board hasn't accepted that, but you absolutely need to know what's happening in these first four stages. And again, it's all about improved economy as we move from that agrarian lifestyle to the industrial or post-industrial lifestyle. Again, what happens is first, in stage one, birth and death rates are high, so little to no population growth. Our population is low and stable. Once our second stage hits, our death rates fall due to improved sanitation and healthcare. That lowers our death rate, but our birth rates remain high because we're still living a lot of that agrarian type of mentality, where we need the babies to work on the farm. We need the babies to take care of us once we get too old to work. Once we go into that third stage, the industrial stage, death rates level out, birth rates begin to fall. Our growth of our population starts to slow down and stop. In the post-industrial, now we have very low birth rates, very low death rates. This is where at that replacement level fertility. So we're at the replacement fertility rate of 2.1 more economically developed, 2.5 less economically developed. Because of that, our population stabilizes and steadies out. Right? Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys, and you would be able to use that in terms of analyzing a population.